Chapter 13 Lizard Mine. Preferring to get an early start, the sun wasn't even up before Aghanim ventured out of the cave. The storm was still raging on and would probably keep up for at least another day or two, so there was no point in waiting any longer. He had been unable to sleep, and his thoughts were occupied on how they were ever going to complete this little quest of Link's, but the bulk of his concentration was on that girl in the carriage that they had pretended to rob the other day. She was so beautiful, and smelled so nice that he hadn't been able to resist stealing a kiss like that, but when she returned the second quick one that they shared, his heart nearly melted. "And yet you didn't even ask her name," he scolded himself as he moved away from the cave. "Brilliant, Aghanim. The prettiest girl in Hyrule likes you and you didn't even ask her name." The robed wizard didn't want to admit just how much he had been thinking of her lately, and how much he wanted to see her again, so a nice long run up into the Lost Hills would probably help him get back his concentration. So he ran, moving much faster than he would be able to while traveling with Link, since his partner wasn't able to teleport like he could. So he was out of the forest and climbing up into the Lost Hills of Death Mountain's eastern side, just as the sun was starting to come up. His ability to vanish and reappear across short distances also allowed him to avoid a majority of the creatures that Link would have certainly wanted to fight, but Aghanim had no such desire. The rain made the terrain more difficult to negotiate, since the grass and later rocks were both slippery now, forcing him to focus on the task at hand instead of that girl. The sun was getting higher in the sky, illuminating the land as he climbed higher into the Lost Hills, but the rain still did not stop. Everyone knew where Lizard Mine was, and sometimes children would dare each other to go down into the darkness. None of them ever did, just as he and Link dared each other when they were children, but this also left him with the knowledge required to find the place pretty easily. Luck seemed to be with Aghanim as he made his way up the hills without encountering any problems like he had with the moblins, although in this place, those creatures were the least of his worries. There could easily be Octoroks, or even worse, Lynels, but thankfully, he did not meet either of these threats. The landscape was completely illuminated by the time he reached the top of the last hill, and there, carved into the face of Death Mountain, was the entrance to Lizard Mine. It was nice to finally get out of the rain as he stepped past the support beams that formed the archway, and now it was time to find the damn chest. Total darkness awaited him within, but such things were no problem for a wizard who could produce flame from his hands. So he tossed a few fireballs into the blackness, and the outline of the tunnel was illuminated once they hit the ground. This had to be done every few feet, but the orange light allowed him to carefully make his way down the old minecart tracks as the tunnel continued to descend. The wizard also kept a sphere of flame in each hand to better see the area closest to him, but so far there was nothing remarkable about this place. It appeared to be just a single, really deep hole where Hyrule used to get iron or something, and Aghanim was starting to feel silly for fearing this place as a boy, but then... "And what do we have here?" he asked himself as the tunnel suddenly widened. No, the tunnel didn't get any wider. It ended at an opening, and beyond was some kind of chamber. There were bricks on the ground from where the old miners had first broken through, but after throwing a few fireballs, the robed wizard saw that it was the only damage that had been done. The floors, walls, and ceiling were made from the same brick, and aside from being dusty, the place looked pretty pristine. A few more fireballs as he entered allowed him to see that there were slots of some kind along the walls, and that was when he realized what this place was. "A tomb," he said with a half-hearted laugh. "It's an ancient tomb." Each slot in the wall was a resting place for whoever the skeletons laying on them had once been, but there was no way to know since there was no writing. The body's flesh and clothes had long ago rotted away, leaving only a sword resting on each slab next to the bones. Aghanim was not in the habit of grave robbing, so he ignored the weapons while moving across the chamber, but then stopped when a soft clang echoed through the room when his foot touched something hard. Moving the fire in his hand closer to the floor, he saw that it was a knight's helm, along with a trail of something dark. "Blood?" he whispered as he touched it with his finger. It made sense. Impa had warned him that the scout sent there by the princess had not returned, and the helmet looked new enough to not belong in this place. But what had happened to him? Had his helmet been knocked off and the knight dragged away by something? Aside from the sound of the flickering flames and the noises made by himself, the robed wizard didn't hear anything at all. The blood trail continued across the floor and through another doorway before it became too dark to see again, and Aghanim was about to continue on when a new sound reached his ears. It was a voice, soft and weakened, but still a voice, and it was calling for help. It was hard to tell with how the walls echoed, but if the person who left the blood trail was still alive, then maybe they could help him. So he hurried on, down a long hallway filled with more skeletons on slabs, and into an even larger chamber where a sarcophagus was set in the center. The lid was open, and there was a man inside who was nearly completely covered with wrappings, like a mummy. But unlike the skeletons, this was not someone who had died hundreds of years ago, and by the way the mummy shifted around, he was still alive.
"Help me,"
the man said weakly as Aghanim approached.
"Please, help."
"Hold still, I'll get you out of this," he replied as he examined the wrappings. "My name is Aghanim. I'm a wizard. Can you tell me what happened to you?" The man suddenly groaned as if in agony, and the wrappings pulled themselves out of the robed wizard's hands, wrapping more tightly around the man's body as they covered a bit more of his skin. It appeared to be slowly constricting around his entire body like a long snake, and Aghanim didn't know how to remove them without hurting him.
"I'm a scout sent by Princess Zelda,"
he groaned with a pained voice.
"You have to get out of here before it's too late. I thought they wanted the chest, but they really wanted me."
"Who wanted you?" the robed wizard asked as he looked around. "What are—" His words stopped as he spotted a pile of discarded armor on the floor, along with a small chest bearing the royal emblem, which had been dropped on the floor as if it were meaningless. So he walked over and picked it up, just tucking it safely under his robe, when the scout started moaning desperately. There was now a new sound in the chamber, a sort of rattling and shambling sound, as something came up behind him. The scout continued to try and get his attention, meaning that it was bad, so Aghanim spun around while tossing a fireball from his hand. There was a figure behind him, but then the fireball struck it in the chest, exploding it into 100 pieces. This was not what the robed wizard expected to happen, but it made sense upon closer investigation of one of the pieces. It was a leg bone, and judging by how many bones were laying around, plus the skull, there was enough there to make a complete skeleton, complete with ancient sword laying on the floor near it. Suddenly he heard more rattling, and after throwing a few fireballs into the corners of the chamber, he was able to see that his attacker had been a skeleton, since a dozen of its friends were now getting off their slabs and shambling towards the center. They rasped and held their ancient blades above their heads as they entered the chamber, slowly surrounding the robed wizard, but Aghanim was not about to die in a place like this. Tossing 2 fireballs, he scattered 2 of the skeletons as the rest advanced, but instead of waiting for them, he made his next move. Rushing toward the nearest one as it swung its blade, he ducked around it, grabbing the weapon while kicking the skeleton in the side of the leg, and then slicing its head off when it stumbled sideways. He then deflected the next one's slash before cleaving it in half, and tossed the blade at the next one, knocking its head off. "Hechizo!" he yelled while holding his hands toward the next one. Another skeleton was standing close enough to the targets that they both vanished in a flash of light, replaced by gelatinous bots, which the other skeletons immediately attacked. Now that they were gathered in a nice group, it was easy for the robed wizard to scatter the rest with fireballs, and after the bones and swords had finished falling, the tomb became quiet once again. Not wanting to wait for more to show up, Aghanim ran back to the mummified scout to get him out of here, but instead he had to jump back to avoid getting slashed by his suddenly clawed hands. "What the?" he exclaimed as he looked at him. The scout then sat up, and the robed wizard knew right away that something was very wrong. The man's skin was now covered completely by the wrappings, but his now glowing red eyes could be seen from under them as he slowly got up out of the sarcophagus and stood up, arms outstretched as he advanced towards Aghanim. It was a strange and horrible thing that had happened to the scout, and suddenly the robed wizard was very glad that he had never found the courage to enter this place as a child.
"Grave robber,"
he said with a voice deep and hollow.
"Join us. Become us. Guard this place with us. Forever."
"I'm so sorry, my friend," Aghanim replied as he backed away. I don't know how to save you, but I won't allow you to suffer here. The creature grabbed for him, but Aghanim ducked down to avoid it while kicking his legs out from under him, and the creature fell onto his back. Fire gathered in the robed wizard's hands as he stood up, and then he tossed it down, engulfing the creature's wrappings in flames. It was his hope that this would be the end of it, but then the creature started to get up, acting as if the flames were not there, even though they had completely consumed him. So again, he backed away, leaving the chamber as a certain powerful magic gathered between his hands. This was a special spell that he was preparing, and it was incredibly powerful, although not practical for use in battle. It required almost 2 full minutes to gather the mystical energy required to execute it, during which time most enemies would simply attack and interrupt it, if they weren't slow-moving tomb guardians, that is. So he continued to back down the hall, towards the entrance back into Lizard Mine, the creature advancing and burning while the gold-colored magic became more intense. Finally, it flashed brighter, signaling that the spell was ready, but Aghanim made sure he was back through the hole in the wall before doing anything.
You cannot escape,
the burning creature continued.
You will be hunted. You will be captured. You will be one of us. Forever.
I wish I could have saved you, Aghanim replied. Instead, I give you peace. Vamos! The gold magic between his hands became a massive fireball that launched toward the creature, causing it to vanish in a large explosion. The force of the blast knocked Aghanim down as the first explosion launched 100 smaller versions of the original fireball in all directions throughout the chamber, and each one became another explosion. All of this destruction caused the brick ceiling to collapse, burying the tomb under 1,000,000 tons of mountain, and this destruction spread into Lizard Mine as Aghanim sprinted towards the exit.